Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something brave. You're going to survive a Viking winter. Not the movie version, with horned helmets and roaring fireplaces. No, we're going full deep fjord, frost on your eyelashes, can't feel your toes by dusk kind of winter. You're trudging through snow up to your knees, your cloak soaked in freezing mist, and the only warmth in sight is a distant, flickering firelight bleeding out the seams of a longhouse. Above you, the sky dances in waves of green and violet, the aurora borealis swirling like a ghost's bedtime story. You step through the drifts, every breath a white plume, and wonder how anyone managed to survive this. Let's be real, you probably wouldn't. The average person today would last what? 2 hours? Maybe 3, if you brought a heated blanket and emotional support thermos. But the Vikings? They thrived here. They made this land their myth-soaked home. They didn't just scrape by. They told stories, raised kids, hunted elk, and wrote poetry, all while being one poorly timed snowstorm away from freezing stiff. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and if you're still awake enough, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see who's tuning in from the coldest place tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind bites harder the deeper into the fjord you go, funneled by cliffs that echo with distant howls. Could be wolves, could be the wind, hard to tell. The snow here isn't fluffy, it's hard-packed and icy, crunching under your boots like glass. And yet, in this harshness, there's stillness, beauty. The sky above is a cosmic river, shimmering and alive, casting soft greens and pinks across the snow-covered landscape like spilled paint on a blank canvas. The average Viking lived in Scandinavia, modern-day Norway, Sweden and Denmark, and winters there lasted up to 6 months. We're talking sub-zero temperatures, zero sunlight for weeks, and just enough firewood to either cook or stay warm, not both. Historians still argue whether Viking settlements further north were truly year-round, or if people migrated with the seasons. One thing's for sure, those who stayed had systems, traditions, and secrets for pushing through the coldest nights. The first secret, knowing where to build. Vikings didn't plop their homes just anywhere. You'd look for a natural windbreak, maybe a hill or dense forest, and you'd want proximity to fresh water that didn't freeze completely solid. You'd build low to the ground, half buried even, to trap the earth's warmth. The more sun it caught in the summer, the more passive heat you'd store heading into winter. Smart, right? Like ancient eco-architecture, minus insulation foam. Now, picture this, you're hiking into a small Viking village, just a dozen longhouses, all thatched with turf and timber, huddled around a central communal hall. Smoke snakes upward from each roof. There's no scent of pine and cinnamon here, no scented candles. It's dried fish, animal fat, burning peat, and body odor. A heady mix. But inside those homes, that's where survival starts. Evening falls fast in winter. Like blink and it's pitch black. So the moment the sun starts dipping, everyone rushes to finish outdoor tasks. Haul water, chop wood, bring the livestock inside. Yes, inside. But we'll get to that later. For now the sky darkens to that deep indigo that looks painted on. The stars come out sharper than you've ever seen, constellations so vivid you feel like you could reach up and snag one between your mittens. If you had mittens, which you don't, you're Vikinging tonight. Get used to finger numbness. But you finally reach the longhouse, just as the first snow flurries drift down, soft and slow like ash from a dying fire. You knock. Well, more like shove open the hide flap covering the doorway, and a wave of heat and smell hits you. It's smoky, crowded, and dimly lit by oil lamps, but it's alive. You step in, and someone hands you a wooden cup of something hot. Probably ale, possibly goat broth. Either way, don't ask what's floating in it. Just sip, and sit close to the fire pit. And as the warmth seeps into your bones, you realize something. This isn't just about surviving winter. It's about enduring it together. Vikings weren't lone warriors in fur capes posing for fantasy covers. They were families, communities. They knew that the real enemy wasn't just cold, it was isolation. One fringe theory? That the northern lights, the aurora, weren't just pretty. They were spiritual. Many Vikings believed they were reflections of Valkyrie armor, or the breath of gods, or some kind of celestial warning. Others thought the lights were dangerous, that you should never wave at them or whistle under them, lest they swoop down and, well, let's just say it doesn't end well. Scholars still argue whether these beliefs were consistent across Norse regions or more localized folklore, but it makes sense. When the sky turns into a glowing ribbon every night, you're going to assign it some meaning. Someone starts singing near the fire. Low, slow, a lullaby meant to soothe children into sleep and, probably, keep nightmares away. You let the melody wrap around you. It's in Old Norse, harsh consonants softened by time. The heat, the song, the flickering shadows all work together, and for a moment, you forget the ice outside. But only for a moment, because winter always waits. You wake, or more accurately, you stir, from a half-sleep on a bed of straw and sheepskin. Your limbs are stiff from the cold, even though you were inches from the hearth all night. The longhouse never truly goes quiet. Someone's always coughing, shifting, snoring. Livestock shuffles in the back room. And then there's the wind, pressing against the walls like a wolf too polite to knock. Before you can move, your senses take inventory. First, the smoky air. It stings your eyes, but tells you the fire didn't die overnight. That's good. Second, warmth near your feet. Someone's child probably crept into your bedding at some point. Third, the smell of something sizzling. Blubber? Pork? You can't be sure, but you're sure it's breakfast, and that alone is enough motivation to push through the stiff joints and rise. Surviving Viking winters was never about comfort. It was about cleverness, especially when it came to warmth. Forget your central heating, your electric blankets, your hot water bottles. The Vikings had fur, fat, and firelight, and they knew how to use every scrap. First up, fur. Reindeer, bear, wolf, fox, whatever they could trap, they turned into clothing. Fur cloaks with the hide turned inward, wool tunics beneath, layers upon layers like medieval lasagna. A common outfit for winter included linen underclothes, surprisingly breathable, then wool, then leather, then fur. No zippers, just loops, ties, and a healthy sense of urgency. You didn't dress for style. You dressed not to die. And if you were particularly fortunate, you'd slather yourself with goose fat or seal oil, both insulators and surprisingly effective windbreakers. Yes, you'd stink. But that's sort of the Viking way. Hygiene wasn't ignored, but in winter, survival over scent was the unspoken rule. And remember, everyone smelled the same. If anything, the oil gave you a bit of personal flair. Like Viking cologne. Eau de walrus, fire, of course, was the centerpiece. Every longhouse had a hearth down the middle, a narrow trench filled with coals, surrounded by stone or packed earth, with a simple smoke hole in the roof. Not exactly an HVAC system, but effective. The heat rose straight up, curling through the rafters and warming the space just enough to keep frostbite away. If you stood too close, you might scorch your fur. Too far, and your toes might become Viking popsicles. Here's where things got smart. Hearths weren't just for heat. They were for light, cooking, rituals, and socializing. Everything revolved around that glowing heart of the home. People even slept around it in a sort of communal circle. Elders, children, warriors, all bundled in cloaks and animal hides. Not for bonding, though that happened. For warmth. Your neighbor's body heat could mean the difference between surviving the night or waking up with frostbitten fingers. Historians still debate whether every Viking home had a full trench hearth or if some used portable braziers in colder months. But across excavations, one thing's clear: fire management was an art. You couldn't waste wood. You learned to bank coals overnight with ash, trapping heat without burning fuel. You had to know your fuel too. Driftwood? Smoky. Peat? Slow burn. Pine? Crackled beautifully, but quick to vanish. And speaking of fuel, fat was as precious as gold. Whale blubber, bear grease, and even tallow from livestock were used to make lamps, salves, and cooking bases. A scoop of fat could light your corner of the longhouse for an hour, or sizzle with onions in a communal stew. It was warmth you could wear, burn, or eat. Here's a fun fact: not everyone agrees that the Vikings were as miserable in winter as we assume. Sure, it was deadly, but all slower, calmer. The raids paused. The farming halted. The ships stayed docked or dragged inland. You had time to tell stories, mend clothing, carve runes, or drink things you probably shouldn't drink. Some scholars argue Viking winters were deeply social, a forced retreat into coziness. Others say that's just romanticizing centuries of frostbite and rationing. Jury's still out. You glance around the longhouse and notice how carefully everything is placed. Skins hang by the walls, drying. Tools lie near the fire to stay warm and prevent cracking. Even the seating matters. Older folks get the warmest spots naturally. Kids, tucked away in bundles, half dreaming, half listening to grown-up talk they don't quite understand. Someone's combing out their beard with a carved bone pick. It's a slow morning. Every movement is deliberate, conserving energy, conserving heat. The windows, if you can call them that, are just slits covered with oiled animal gut, translucent, flexible, and better than nothing. Glass was rare and precious, and you certainly weren't wasting it on sunlight that wouldn't show up until March. Instead, the world outside is glimpsed in flickers, shadows moving across the stretched gut, light rippling through the ice crusted on the edges. Another person enters the longhouse, stamping snow off their boots, hands tucked under armpits, breath coming in clouds. They mutter something about frost cracking the water bucket. Again, you'd think by now they'd keep it inside. But space is limited. Every choice is a trade. Your stomach growls, and just in time, someone hands you a slab of bread and a smear of butter. Well, something close to butter. Maybe sheep tallow. Hard to tell in this light. You don't ask. You just chew. It's dense, salty, and absolutely the best thing you've tasted today. Hunger has a way of doing that. As you sit, munching, the fire crackles, and someone pokes at it with a stick carved with tiny runes. Not magic. Not exactly. But comforting, like a reminder that there's order to this chaos, that even the coldest winters can be survived, one ember at a time. The fire flickers low as the morning creeps forward, but in the dim amber glow, something peculiar catches your attention. A wooden bed frame in the corner, just beyond the circle of heat. You shuffle closer, careful not to step on a sleeping goat, and realize that this is where the heads of the household sleep. A bed, sort of. More like a wooden box, really. High sides. Narrow. Piled with furs and straw. It looks uncomfortably coffin-like. You slip your hand into the bedding. It's warm, but scratchy, woven wool and coarse linen mixed with sheepskin. It would itch like mad, but after a day in -20 degrees Celsius wind, you'd snuggle into a cactus if it promised body heat. Vikings didn't sleep sprawled out like we do. They curled. Side sleepers, knees pulled up, layers wrapped tight, sometimes even with leather straps to keep blankets from slipping off. The idea was to conserve heat, not stretch out. You want to expose as little of yourself to the air as possible. Which is also probably why these beds had high sides, like a thermal trap, keeping in your own warmth. Now, if you weren't the patriarch or matriarch of the house, forget personal beds. Most people slept communally. Row after row of cloaks and bodies on raised wooden platforms, or even directly on the packed earth floor. Kids with parents, siblings lumped together, dogs curled up at their feet. The closer to the hearth, the warmer, and therefore more coveted, the sleeping spot. And get this, livestock? Often inside the longhouse too. Cows, goats, chickens. Not just for safety from predators or thieves, but because their body heat literally helped heat the house. One cow gives off the same warmth as a 500-watt space heater. So yes, it smelled gamey. But it was survival. You haven't lived until you've been gently awakened by a chicken pecking near your face. This is where dreams came in. Not just sleep, but stories told in the dark to pass time, scare kids into behaving, or give people something beautiful to hold on to. After all, when the sun disappears for months and your whole world is flickering firelight and frost, you need myths. Did I ever tell you about the mountain troll with 5 hearts? Someone whispers. And suddenly, you're wide-eyed in your itchy bedroll, listening to a tale of giants frozen in the hills, of ghost ships that sail silently through the clouds, of dreams that wander too far and never come back. Vikings believed dreams could be prophetic, dangerous, even deadly. One fringe tale from old Norse sagas talks of a dream walker, a person who could send their spirit out while sleeping to spy, to warn, even to haunt. Was it metaphor? Or did they truly believe that sleep connected you to other worlds? Historians still argue whether these tales were meant as literal beliefs or symbolic folklore, but in a world where sleep could mean not waking up, the line between dreams and death blurred fast. That's why people carved protective runes above sleeping areas. Not for decoration, for defense. If you were lucky, you fell asleep to the murmur of a skald, the village storyteller, reciting part of the Edda, or maybe a local tale about a boy who tricked a frost giant with a block of salted cod. Humor was part of it too. These people laughed, even in the darkness, especially in it, because when your days are mostly night and the cold gnaws through bone, a funny story becomes a survival tool. One bedtime ritual? Sniffing your bedding to check if it had frozen. Really. Moisture from breath and sweat could seep in, and by morning, the edges might have iced over. If you woke with your blanket stiff as a board, you'd spend the next hour drying it by the fire. That is, if someone hadn't already claimed the warmest spot for their boots. And while we're here, yes, Vikings snored. A lot. Imagine a room full of people in various stages of sleep, plus animals, plus someone mumbling a saga in their sleep. Peaceful? Not exactly, but strangely cozy, like being buried in chaos that somehow works. You roll over in your imaginary straw bed and let your hand trail the carved edge of the frame. It's been worn smooth by generations. Someone once traced these same runes to feel safer before falling asleep. Someone once whispered the same old prayer for warmth, for light, for spring. The air grows colder, even inside. Someone stokes the fire again, sending a brief burst of sparks into the air. You pull your cloak tighter. Try not to think about how little insulation stands between you and the wind howling just outside. But there's a kind of comfort in it too, a closeness with nature, with danger, with everyone sharing the same fear. It binds people. Sleep was never guaranteed out here. Not when the roof might collapse under snow, or when wolves circled the livestock pens, or when a sudden fever could sweep through the close quarters of a longhouse and take a child before morning. But still, they slept. They made beds. They built warmth out of nothing. They survived. And you? You're still awake, technically. But the firelight is softer now, and someone has started humming again. A lullaby, maybe, or a prayer. You lie back down, let the story fade, and maybe, just maybe, you dream of frost giants too. You wake to movement, not loud, not urgent, just the gentle chaos of people shifting into daytime survival mode. Boots being laced, children being nudged, the quiet, slurping sound of something being stirred in a pot that smells aggressively like fish. You blink the sleep from your eyes, face still half numb from the cold, and remember, right, you're still a Viking. And it's breakfast. Sort of. You're handed a wooden bowl of something. Grayish. Chunky. Smells like the ocean, and a wet cellar had a baby. It's lutefisk, most likely, cod soaked in lye, then rinsed into a gelatinous state. Yes, it jiggles. Yes, people actually ate this. Voluntarily. Welcome to Viking cuisine. When winter tightened its grip, the Viking diet had one job. Not taste good, but last. That meant preservation. Salting, drying, fermenting, smoking. Any way to stretch summer's catch through months of darkness. Vikings were culinary minimalists with a flair for the dramatic. Why just dry fish when you can hang it until it's basically leather and smells like a Viking boot? You chew cautiously, trying not to breathe through your nose. It's not awful, it's just unforgettable. Food, in Viking winter, wasn't just sustenance. It was community. Longhouse meals were loud, shared, and often weird. Picture a wooden table surrounded by tired, fur-clad survivors of the cold, slurping fish stew, tearing at barley bread, occasionally passing a jug of something so fermented it could strip paint. There's laughter. Someone burps, unapologetically. A child sneaks an onion chunk off a plate and gets a playful cuff for it. But the feasting wasn't random. It followed a rhythm. A kind of pulse that beat through the long months. Midwinter brought Yule, a celebration that lasted 12 days and involved more eating, drinking, and ritual than most other times combined. Historians still argue whether Yule was primarily a fertility festival, a sun return prayer, or just a solid excuse to drink mead until you saw double. Probably all three. A typical Yule feast included roast meats, often boar or sheep, if you had them. Otherwise, dried fish, preserved vegetables, ale, and flatbread. Honey was rare and prized, and if you had anything sweet, it was treated like gold dust. But the point wasn't luxury. It was continuity. A reminder that even in darkness, you were still here. Still together. Still capable of roasting something over fire and laughing around a table. You glance around and see it now, the remnants of last night's celebration. Grease-stained wooden platters. A fallen drinking horn. Someone's passed out under a fur blanket near the wall, gently snoring into a haystack. They're probably a scald. Storytellers tend to overdo it. Meals also served a practical purpose. They gave structure to time when the sun refused to. Morning stew, midday bread, evening porridge. No clocks, just stomachs. And, occasionally, the need to ward off depression. Because yes, Vikings absolutely got seasonal blues. You try living in 6 hours of daylight, or less, for months on end, and see how chipper you feel. But they had their coping mechanisms: singing, feasting, rituals, and fermented shark. No, really, one fringe culinary habit, still practiced in parts of Iceland, is hakal, or fermented Greenland shark. Buried, left to rot slightly, then air-dried for months. When ready, it smells like ammonia and despair. Vikings may not have invented it, but their spirit of sure, let's eat that and see what happens, definitely inspired it. The children in the longhouse are already doing chores, no lazy mornings here. One's stoking the fire. Another is collecting the bowls. A third is helping churn something thick and beige in a goatskin sack. Probably butter. Maybe glue. You don't ask. Food preservation also meant clever tools. Fish hung in cold smokehouses. Root vegetables were buried deep in the ground to stay insulated. Meat, salted beyond recognition, and sometimes stored in barrels filled with sour whey. If you opened one, you'd better really want what was inside, because the smell would knock out a small bear. Still, these people were proud of their resilience. Food wasn't just fuel, it was proof you'd planned ahead. That your summer self had looked after your winter self. The more full your pantry was, the more power you had. In fact, hoarding food was sometimes seen as a sign of wisdom, or greed, or both. Again, historians debate. You help clean up, mostly to earn another chunk of that chewy bread, and someone hands you a small honey cake, saved from the Yule offerings. It's dry, dense, delicious, mostly because it doesn't taste like fish. Then, almost like clockwork, the longhouse quiets. Not silent, but settled. People return to seats, furs, chores. A woman begins weaving near the door, rhythmically tugging the threads. 2 men play a dice game on a carved board. The old man in the corner hums under his breath. This is Viking peace. Not the loud feasts, not the raiding stories, but this, routine. Repetition. Warmth in the monotony. And just when you think you've seen it all, someone drops a heavy, round object onto the table with a thud. It's cheese. Hard as stone, probably aged for months, maybe years. You knock on it. Solid. Could double as a weapon. Someone slices it with a tiny axe, casually. You're handed a wedge. It tastes like salty dust, but with a buttery afterthought that lingers just long enough to be pleasant. There's no silverware, no napkins, just hands, wooden spoons, and the occasional sleeve swipe. Still, it works. Everyone eats, everyone survives, and as you finish your last bite, someone lifts their mug and mutters something in Old Norse, half toast, half prayer. You don't understand the words, but the feeling that you get. The longhouse doors creak open, and a sharp gust of wind slices through the warmth like a blade. Everyone flinches instinctively, even the goats. A man steps in, wrapped head to foot in furs, bits of ice clinging to his beard. He stomps off the snow and shakes himself like a very grumpy bear. Roof held, he mutters, to no one in particular. It's not just a weather report, it's a relief. In Viking winter, your roof is your last line of defense. If it gives in under snow, collapses, or leaks, you've basically lost your shield against the gods. And if the roof fails in the middle of the night, you might not live to complain about it. You help close the door again, heavy wood thudding shut. It's midday now, or what counts as midday in the deep winter twilight. The sky outside is a soft gray blue, like it can't quite commit to either day or night. The cold is dry and still, almost peaceful, but biting the moment it touches your skin. You step back inside, grateful for the cramped chaos. This is where the longhouse effect kicks in. Imagine a giant log cabin, except it's not just where you sleep. It's where you live, eat, work, store your gear, shelter your animals, tell your stories. It's cramped, dark, noisy, smoky, and perfect. The architecture wasn't accidental. Longhouses were marvels of harsh climate design. Thick wooden walls packed with clay or turf, roofs layered with birch bark and sod for insulation. One long central fire trench with holes in the roof to let smoke out, but not too much heat. And they weren't huge, often only about 15 to 25 meters long. You packed as much warmth into that space as you could without suffocating. And yet, it was all about balance. Too small, and you'd freeze. Too large, and you couldn't keep it warm. Too airtight, and everyone chokes. Too open, and the frost creeps in. It was a constant, daily negotiation with the cold. People lived elbow to elbow, often separated by thin wooden partitions if you were lucky, or just invisible boundaries drawn by routine. Your space wasn't yours. It was ours, which meant if someone was sick, everyone knew. If someone had gas from the night's boiled cabbage stew, congratulations, the entire household gets to share the moment. But in that closeness came a weird kind of comfort. You knew everyone's cough, everyone's laugh. When someone shifted in their sleep across the room, you could guess who by the rhythm. Children grew up in a bubble of noise and warmth, surrounded by parents, cousins, animals, neighbors. Privacy? Unthinkable. But safety? Constant. Even the animals had a system. At night, they'd be brought inside or into an adjoining stable space, still part of the longhouse but separated by a low wall. The warmth from the livestock radiated into the home, and if one of the cows mooed oddly in the night, someone would wake and check. Not just for the cow's sake. For everyone's? A restless animal could mean wolves nearby, or sickness, or worse. There's a fringe theory, fascinating, if a bit smelly, that longhouses develop their own microclimates. That is, the temperature at floor level, near the hearth, might differ by several degrees from the rafters near the smoke hole. So if you were tall or happened to sleep on a raised platform, you might spend the night alternating between toasty and icicle. Maybe that's why Viking helmets, which didn't have horns by the way, had cheek guards. Not for battle. For drafts. You settle by the wall where a group is busy mending clothes. Wool tunics are being patched, mittens stitched with bone needles, cloaks relined with fur. Clothing wasn't disposable. It was inherited, repaired, patched with mismatched materials until it resembled a collage of past winters. One sleeve from your uncle's old tunic. Fur from a fox caught the year your sister was born. Every layer told a story, and maybe smelled like it too. Someone passes you a pair of winter shoes, thick-soled, stuffed with hay. Yes, hay. Before insulation foam, Vikings used what they had. And dry grass, believe it or not, makes excellent filler. It wicks moisture, traps heat, and can be swapped out as it gets damp. You tie them on and instantly understand why someone once wrote a saga verse about the pleasure of dry feet. Outside, the wind begins to pick up. Snow is falling again, softly, but with intent. That sound, the hush of flakes hitting the roof, is oddly comforting. It muffles everything. You feel like you're inside a cocoon, a smoky, wool-covered, mildly goat-scented cocoon. But warm. There's a lull in the activity, and someone starts humming. Others join in. It's not a song, you know, but it's slow, repetitive, almost hypnotic. A working song, meant to pass the time and keep rhythm. A woman beats wool with a wooden club. Another stirs a pot in the corner. Two boys braid rope from flax. Everyone has a role. Even you. You're handed a bundle of kindling, and asked to carry it to the back. Firewood is gold. It's hoarded, rationed, counted. Every stick matters. And if you drop any, you're picking it up fast, before someone decides you're not cut out for this century. As you stack the wood, you notice something scratched into the beam above the hearth. A rune. It looks simple. 3 straight lines, intersecting at odd angles. It's a bind rune for protection, or maybe warmth. Hard to tell. Historians still argue about rune meanings, especially when they show up in odd places like kitchen beams and bed frames. Was it magical thinking? A superstition? Or just a way to feel like someone was watching over you? You sit back down, the hum of the longhouse rising again like a lullaby. The fire pops. Someone laughs softly. A dog sighs. And even though you can feel the cold waiting just outside that wall, pressing, endless, you know this strange little wooden building will hold through another night. Because it always has, later in the day, after the chores are finished and the fire has been fed for the 3rd time, someone stands and says a word you don't quite recognize. The tone is casual, but there's a glint in their eye. People start to move, slowly, eagerly, like they've been waiting for this. Cloaks are pulled on, boots laced tighter. A few people grab towels and bundles of herbs. One man hauls a leather bucket of water. You ask what's going on. Steam, someone says with a grin, then gestures for you to follow. Outside, the cold slaps you in the face like a smug reminder that yes, you are still in Viking Scandinavia, and no, it does not care about your feelings. But the group doesn't flinch. They march through the snow toward a small, rounded building that looks like a squat version of the longhouse. Smoke curls out from the roof. It's a badstaffer, a Viking bathhouse. Yes, a sauna. Vikings were famously fond of their steam, not just for hygiene, but for health, ritual, and honestly, just feeling human again during a 6-month snow globe nightmare. You duck into the structure and are hit with a wave of moist heat so sudden it feels like you've been swallowed by a friendly dragon. The air is thick, almost wet. The room is dim, lit by low burning lamps and the glow of hot stones piled in a hearth at the center. Steam rises as someone ladles water over them, hissing like a serpent in a temper tantrum. You peel off your cloak, your outer layers, your dignity, and join the group on a low wooden bench that's already damp from previous occupants. The temperature in here is probably hovering near 90 degrees Celsius. Your pores open. Your muscles unclench. You feel like soup, and it's fantastic. This isn't a luxury, it's medicine. The heat drives out the cold that's settled in your bones. The sweat draws out whatever toxins you've accumulated from drinking 3-day-old fish broth. And it helps keep sickness at bay, important when your winter involves 30 people breathing the same smoke and goat fumes for weeks on end. And it wasn't just about heat. There were rituals. One person crushes juniper branches and sprinkles them into the steam. The scent is sharp, fresh, almost piney. Another person starts scrubbing themselves with coarse salt and snow. Yes, snow. A quick dash outside, a handful scooped, then back into the heat with steaming skin. You sit, dazed, limbs jelly-like. And just when you think you're melting into the bench entirely, someone stands up and says 2 words you do recognize. Ice bath. Wait. What? They fling open the wooden door, step outside into the snow, and throw themselves into it. Naked, screaming, laughing. Another person follows. Then a third. Then someone makes direct eye contact with you, grins, and gestures like, "You coming, or what?" Vikings swore by contrast bathing. It wasn't just adrenaline. It was believed to strengthen the body, sharpen the mind, and boost resistance to the elements. Historians still debate whether this was widespread or more of a cultural quirk from certain regions, but archaeological findings show bathhouse remains all across Norse lands. Stone benches, drainage systems, even tools for scrubbing. You step outside, immediately regret it. The air bites, the snow feels like needles. But you're in it now. You drop down into a snowbank and howl like a wounded bear, your voice echoing into the gray sky. It's awful. It's exhilarating. It's oddly cleansing. Back inside, you feel your skin tingle like it's been rebooted. Someone hands you a drink, fermented something, as always. You sip. It burns. But in a good way. A woman next to you starts braiding her damp hair. Another man sharpens a bone comb against a stone. These were tools of cleanliness, yes, but also of pride. Vikings were vain in the best way. Grooming wasn't a joke. Weekly baths were expected, and combs, tweezers, and razors have all been found in burial sites. Dirty didn't mean unclean. It meant unready. In some Norse tales, warriors were mocked for being disheveled or greasy-haired. A proper Viking looked as sharp as his blade, even in winter, especially in winter. And in here, amid the sweat and steam, the teasing laughter and drifting song, you feel the opposite of cold. It's not just physical, it's psychological. The cold out there doesn't seem so unbeatable anymore. Not when you've beaten it off your skin, steamed it from your lungs, and thrown a snowball in its face. One fringe belief, recorded in the writings of later observers, suggested that bathing wasn't just healthful but spiritual. That sweating cleansed not just the body but the soul. Maybe that's why some people bathe in silence, eyes closed, whispering to themselves, or to gods, or to ancestors. You lean back, eyes half closed. The stones crackle. The steam swirls. Your heartbeat slows. Outside, the wind howls like it's searching for someone to shake. But in here, you've got heat. You've got people. You've got one more excuse not to go back out yet. And maybe that's enough for tonight. You step outside the bathhouse, still steaming. Literally, your skin radiates heat in ghostly wisps, like your soul is trying to escape early. But the moment the wind hits, reality returns, harsh, icy, and full of sharp little flakes that sting like tiny thrown needles. Someone tosses you a fur-lined hood. You pull it over your damp hair and brace yourself. There's work to be done, and warmth, however blissful, is temporary. Today, you're heading into the forest. Winter in Viking lands didn't mean hibernation. It meant adaptation. The chores never stopped. The hunts didn't pause. If anything, tracking prey became easier in the snow. Prints were clear, movement more visible, but it also meant your target could see, or smell, you from a mile away if you weren't careful. A man waves for you to follow. You trudge behind him, feet crunching through snow as fine as flour. He moves like he was born in this, silent, swift, efficient. A bow strapped to his back, a knife at his side. He's wrapped in pale furs, blending in so well that if you blinked, you'd lose him in the landscape. You enter the trees, tall, black-limbed sentinels stretching into a gray sky. Everything is quiet. No birdsong. Just the occasional creak of frozen branches and the whisper of snow shifting in the wind. It's not just cold, it's still. The kind of still that makes your breath sound too loud. Hunting in winter was a serious, often desperate endeavor. Meat was life. One elk could feed a village for weeks. But it wasn't just elk. Rabbits, foxes, seals near the coast. Reindeer if you were lucky. And dangerous animals too. Bears, if you dared. Wolves, if you were unlucky. You come across tracks, narrow and sharp. A hare, maybe. The hunter signals for silence and begins to follow. Every step is calculated, slow, You find yourself holding your breath. There's a strange peace to it. The snow muffles the world. Your heartbeat seems to echo in your ears. You're suddenly aware of every muscle, every twitch of wind against your face. It's meditative. If meditation also came with the risk of being mauled by an angry boar. The hunter stops and gestures, there, in the clearing. A stag. Antlers like a crown, breath fogging the air in slow bursts. It stands still, unaware, majestic, and probably delicious. The hunter raises his bow, fingers moving with the calm of someone who's done this since childhood. You hear the twang, then a distant thud. The stag flinches, staggers, then collapses into the snow like a dropped sculpture. It's not a cheer that follows, just quiet respect. The hunter approaches slowly, murmuring something under his breath, thanks perhaps, or apology. The animal is bled and dressed swiftly, no part wasted. Meat wrapped, bones saved, even the sinew used later for binding tools or sewing boots. You help carry part of the load back, shoulders aching beneath the weight. But there's a pride in it. This isn't a kill, it's survival. And it tastes better than anything you've had all week, even the mystery cheese. On the way home, you spot something odd, a small bundle of twigs tied with red string, hanging from a tree branch. The hunter nods toward it. Marker, he says, or warning. You don't ask. See, Vikings didn't just fear winter, they respected it, and the forest. It wasn't just where food lived, it was where other things lived. Spirits, shadows, old gods who didn't like being disturbed. Some believed the woods were full of vetir, nature spirits that watched and judged. If you disrespected the land, cut too many trees, left food to rot, cursed too loud, they'd punish you. A misfired hunt, a sprained ankle in deep snow, a sudden whiteout you don't come back from. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were rooted in organized religion or regional superstition, but the evidence is there, in carvings, in charms left in hollow trees, in burial sites surrounded by animal bones and runes. The forest wasn't just land, it was alive, maybe even listening. You pass another marker, this one carved, a bear's paw etched into bark, a sign to others, a tale maybe, or a boundary. You're not sure, and no one explains. Back at the village, the meat is divided. Some for smoking, some for boiling tonight, the finest cut saved for a chieftain, or maybe a sacrifice. The hunter gets the head, his right. He'll dry it, maybe hang it over his door. A trophy, a promise, a story. You slump onto a bench near the fire, exhausted in that deep, satisfying way that only cold and labor can bring. Your fingers still tingle. Your cheeks burn from wind and effort. But the soup bubbling in the pot smells amazing, and someone hands you a bowl without a word. You eat in silence, thinking about the forest, about how easy it is to vanish in there, to freeze, to be forgotten, and how much work it takes, every single day, to not vanish. One fringe practice, whispered about in sagas, told of hunters who'd chew pine resin before tracking animals, said it sharpened the senses, gave them visions. Maybe it was true. Maybe it was just cold-induced hallucination. But when you're elbow-deep in snow with a bow and nothing else between you and starvation, you'll try anything once. Later that night, the hunter sits near the fire, carving something small. Bone, maybe. Antler. You catch a glimpse. It's a tiny elk, rough but elegant. He catches your eye and shrugs. You remember what feeds you, he says. And with that, he keeps carving, the blade whispering through bone, while outside the wind rises once again. That night, the wind doesn't rise. It howls. Not the usual steady moan that creeps around the longhouse edges, but a wild, warbling shriek that presses against the door like something trying to get in. Or someone. It rattles the beams and pulls at the smoke vent above, causing the fire's glow to flicker wildly across the walls. The kids go quiet. The goats shuffle closer to the people. And the old woman in the corner, the one with the braids so long they touch her knees when she sits, she starts whispering something. You can't make out the words at first. They're not meant for you. They're meant for them, the ones outside, or under the house, or behind the wind. Vikings were practical people. Axes, boats, trade, but they were also deeply spiritual, their everyday life soaked in myth and superstition, especially in winter. Because when the world turns black for 18 hours a day, and every gust sounds like a scream, it's hard not to believe something else is watching. The woman's whisper is a golda, a spell song, not flashy, not shouted, just a rhythmic chant, words passed from grandmother to mother to daughter. The melody doesn't rhyme. The language sounds older than anything you've heard in this village. It sways like a lullaby, but hums with warning. You watch as she pulls something from a pouch, a thin piece of wood, carved with sharp lines. A stave. A rune stave, to be specific. This one has the shape of a snowflake split by daggers. Protection, she says. For dreams. For doors. For keeping things out. She tucks it above the lintel and goes back to chanting. You now notice similar marks elsewhere, etched into beams, scratched near windows, even burned into cooking pots. Not decoration. Not art. Armor. Vikings believed in the unseen. The hidden folk, or huldufolk, who lived in stones, trees, or mounds. The draugr, the undead who might crawl from burial mounds midwinter, searching for the warmth they lost. Spirits of the drowned, ghosts of the betrayed, angry ancestors. And in winter, the veil between the living and not so living was said to thin. One fringe tale speaks of a being called the Sinjolfre, the snow elf, not the pretty kind with cheekbones and elvish script. No, this one was more hollow. A figure seen only in snowstorms, appearing behind lost travelers just before they vanished. No one knows if it was a guardian or a predator. Maybe both. Historians can't agree if the Snjolfre was ever widely believed or just local folklore whispered to scare children into staying near the fire. Either way, you check the corners of the room a bit more often now. In the back of the longhouse, a man ties bundles of herbs above the door. Mugwort, yarrow, and juniper, if your nose is right. Not just for smell, though, let's be honest, that helps, but for warding. Smoke from burning herbs was believed to drive away bad spirits. You'd waft it around beds, doorways, and livestock. Sometimes, you'd even rub ash on your skin before sleep, just in case your soul decided to wander. Dreams were not passive in Viking culture. They were dangerous terrain. To dream was to travel. Your spirit might drift out, visit ancestors, or stumble into places it shouldn't. That's why charms and chants guarded sleepers. That's why children's lullabies often sounded more like exorcisms than songs. Take the old Norse lullaby, known in later tradition as Dram Kevedet. It goes something like, "Sleep now, child, or trolls will take your toes." Comforting, right? But fear had a purpose. It kept little hands from wandering near fire pits, or little feet from slipping out the door into blizzards. The fire hisses. A draft slips under the door like a cold hand. You swear you see something move outside, just a shadow. Someone adds another log and murmurs a phrase that sounds like a blessing. You're pretty sure it translates to, "Not tonight, thank you." And here's the strangest part. None of this feels panicked. There's no screaming, no frantic crosses drawn mid-air. Just routine. Like checking the lock before bed. For Vikings, Warding wasn't paranoia, it was protocol. You curl back under your furs, pulling them up past your ears. The sound of the wind is quieter now, or maybe the old woman's golder is louder. Her voice dips low, then rises again, like a tide or a prayer. Above you, on the beam, someone's carved the rune algiz, a symbol of protection, shaped like a trident or an antler. Your eyes follow it until they close. Sleep, when it comes, is strange. You dream of snow that falls upward, of trees that whisper your name in voices older than language, of lightless paths and warm fires in places you've never been. But nothing drags you from the warmth of your fur pile. Not tonight. When you wake, the wind has stopped. The world outside is blanketed in a silence so deep it feels sacred. No footprints in the snow, no shadows on the wall. The stave still hangs above the door, charred a little at the edges, and the old woman is already awake, sharpening her bone needle by the fire, humming something that doesn't have words. You made it through the night. Most nights you do. The stillness after a storm is its own kind of noise. The snow outside gleams faintly under a sky, smeared with pale morning light. Everything is muffled, softer, like the world has been gently padded with cotton. But inside the longhouse, it's a full-blown morning rush. Not chaos, exactly. Just a small, shuffling army of half-awake humans trying to stretch, dress, and eat while not stepping on a goat. Or a child. The kids are already up, of course. Because kids don't care how many centuries ago they lived, they always wake up early. One is poking the fire with the world's most suspicious enthusiasm. Another is chasing a chicken that somehow got loose and is currently fleeing under benches like it owes someone money. You help scoop porridge into bowls, barley again, with dried berries if someone's feeling generous. The kids eat fast, then faster, then run off with cheeks still full and boots barely tied. Because playtime is limited, and play for Viking children is surprisingly rugged. You step outside to follow them, crunching through a fresh layer of snow. The sun hangs low, casting long shadows, and there they are, a group of tiny Norsemen, tumbling through snowdrifts, shrieking with delight. One girl is building what looks suspiciously like a snow troll. Two boys are hurling icy projectiles at each other with disturbing precision. A smaller child is trying to slide downhill on a piece of polished bark and absolutely failing, but laughing anyway. Viking children weren't raised gently. Winter made sure of that. From a young age, they were taught to handle cold, discomfort, and tasks that today would warrant a child labor lawsuit. Fetching firewood, hauling buckets of snow to melt, feeding the livestock, learning how to gut a fish by age 6, and doing all of this in conditions that could, quite literally, freeze your snot solid. But it wasn't all chores and cold fingers. There were games, real ones. They played natlaika, a kind of violent field hockey played on frozen ground. Imagine a cross between lacrosse and mild assault. No helmets, just wooden bats, a leather ball, and a complete disregard for personal safety. It was so intense that even adults sometimes joined in. It may have also doubled as a way to settle grudges without drawing swords. You walk past two kids arm wrestling beside a pile of wood. One of them is maybe 6 and already swearing in Old Norse. You don't ask what it means, but based on the old man's chuckle behind you, it's probably something about trolls. Children were toughened early, not cruelly, but purposefully. The cold didn't care how old you were, and neither did survival. But alongside the toughness, there was care. You notice an older girl tying a scarf more tightly around her little brother's face. A boy sharing his last piece of honey bread with a younger cousin. It's not softness, exactly. More like solidarity. Inside the longhouse, you hear music. Not professional, not polished, just a bone flute and a stretched hide drum. The rhythm is simple, the melody crooked and strange. But the children gather, swaying a little, clapping off beat with mittened hands. It's mesmerizing in the way only winter music can be, something to fill the silence, to push back the dark. Then comes the story. One of the elders leans forward, eyes glittering, and begins a tale. It starts with a frost giant who couldn't stop sneezing. Of course, the kids are riveted. The sneezes destroy villages. The gods get involved. Loki tricks the giant into sneezing himself into a mountain. The usual. The children squeal at every twist. One of them corrects the elder on a detail. No, last time he sneezed out a wolf, and the elder just nods and folds it into the new version. This is how culture survives in the dark. Through misremembered stories, weird jokes, and characters who evolve every time a snowstorm gives you nothing else to do. You're handed a carved wooden figure by one of the kids. It's crude, but recognizable. God, maybe? Or a bear? Or both? The child grins like it's obvious and runs off before you can ask. One fringe belief, shared in a few isolated texts, suggests Viking children had specific dream guides, imaginary or spiritual, animals that visited them in sleep to teach lessons. Foxes, owls, bears. Maybe they were real. Maybe they were invented to give kids something warm to dream about in a cold world. Historians still debate the origins of these tales. Back outside, you watch as a group begins building a snow wall, definitely not a fort, definitely not a prelude to a snowball war. Definitely not the same setup from yesterday that ended with someone crying and someone else pretending to be a Valkyrie for 20 minutes. But here's the thing. This was school. Play was education. It taught strength, coordination, teamwork. How to throw, how to dodge, how to fall without breaking your face. Important stuff when you're one day expected to row a warship or herd angry reindeer through a blizzard. Even lullabies taught things, like which berries to avoid, or how to recognize the sound of ice cracking under thin snow. You hum one under your breath now, it's stuck in your head. Something about don't sleep near the river mouth, or the frost will take your voice. Comforting. The snowball war breaks out, of course. Two sides. Rules made up mid-game. One kid dual-wielding ice chunks like a berserker. You almost get hit, but duck behind a barrel just in time. An old man referees with a straight face and a stick. No eyes, he calls out. And no curses about Odin's mother. Eventually it winds down, everyone breathless, flushed and soaked to the knees. You help herd the kids back inside, where dry socks and warm porridge are waiting. Someone already has the fire roaring. They'll sleep hard tonight, curled beside their parents, dreaming of snow battles and sneezing giants. And tomorrow, they'll do it all again, because winter doesn't stop. And neither do they. The fire crackles low as evening settles in again. Outside, the light fades to that familiar icy gray, but inside the longhouse, the walls begin to flicker with orange, lamplight, firelight, the occasional glint of polished bone or copper. You pull your cloak tighter, settling near the hearth where a group has gathered, not to eat, not to work, but to listen. Because now comes the real warmth of winter, stories of gods and monsters, of ice and fire. Tonight's tale begins with a name you recognize, Surtur, the fire giant. The one with a flaming sword who stands at the edge of Ragnarok, the Viking apocalypse. The skald's voice is calm but deep, weaving images into the dark air as if painting with smoke. Surtur lives in Muspelheim, a realm of heat and chaos. But tonight, the tale isn't about destruction. It's about balance. Because in Norse mythology, winter wasn't just cold, it was the enemy. Personified, alive, and very, very moody. You learn about Skadi, the snow goddess, daughter of a slain giant, hunter of the mountains, goddess of vengeance and ice. The story goes that she bargained with the gods for compensation after her father's death, demanding a husband and a laugh. Not necessarily in that order. She got both. Sort of. The marriage failed, but she stayed on as a powerful deity of winter and survival. Cold, yes, but never cruel. Just honest, like the weather. A boy nearby chimes in. And don't forget the frost giants. He's practically bouncing with excitement. Oh yes, the Jotnar, beings of immense power and chaotic loyalty. They weren't just villains. They were agents of change. Sometimes enemies, sometimes lovers, sometimes both. Loki himself, the shapeshifter and troublemaker extraordinaire, was born of giant blood. A reminder that the lines between god and monster were blurry at best. The gods of fire and the giants of frost, these weren't just metaphors for weather. They shaped how Vikings saw winter. It wasn't just a season. It was a test, an adversary, a sacred force that demanded respect, offerings, and occasionally, a goat. That's not a joke. Offerings were made to the spirits of winter. Food, mead, sometimes small carved figures. Burned or buried, or left in hidden spots near frozen streams. A fringe theory even suggests that some families would feed the cold by placing bits of fat or bread in the snow outside their doors, like a reverse housewarming gift. You shift in place as the story continues. Now, it's about Logi, a being of pure flame, said to have once competed with Loki in an eating contest. Loki lost. Because Logi wasn't a man, he was fire itself. Literal hunger, insatiable and wild. This blend of myth and meal, heat and cold, it's everywhere in Norse belief. Not just gods on thrones or warriors in heaven, but elements personified. You weren't cold, you were visited by frost. The fire didn't just warm you, it spoke to you. Historians still argue how literally these beliefs were held. Were they daily faith, symbolic rituals, or cozy stories meant to pass the time? Truth is, for Vikings, there was no sharp line. Life and myth were braided together like the hair of a shield maiden, tight, intricate, and inseparable. One woman near the fire braids her daughter's hair as the skald speaks. A quiet echo of the gods. The girl listens with eyes wide, lips mouthing parts of the story she clearly already knows by heart. And then comes the part everyone loves, the mischievous tales. Thor disguising himself as a bride to steal back his hammer. Loki turning into a mare, yes, a mare, and giving birth to an 8-legged horse. The gods squabbling, falling, laughing, failing. Like a divine sitcom with significantly more axes. The laughter is warm. Loud. A toddler claps at the wrong moment and no one corrects him. Someone adds juniper to the fire. It pops and sizzles, releasing that crisp, resinous scent that clears the air and makes your eyes sting slightly. You inhale deeply. It smells like memory. Like old winters and good bread and leather boots that never quite dried. But stories weren't just for fun. They were education. Every myth carried a lesson. About strength. About trickery. About the danger of being too proud or too greedy. Odin might have wisdom, but he also sacrificed his eye to get it. Frey gave up his sword for love, and paid for it in the end. The gods weren't perfect. That was the point. They made mistakes, like humans, like you. And that, somehow, makes them even more comforting in the cold. Another child asks if the moon is a god too. The skald smiles and nods. His name is Mani, and he rides across the sky chased by a wolf. Someday the wolf will catch him, but not tonight. The fire dims. People begin to drift toward their bedding spots. You wrap yourself in your cloak, eyes heavy. Before sleep takes you, you glance at the beam above the hearth. There's a carving you hadn't noticed before. A stylized sun, flanked by two wolves. It looks old. Older than the longhouse, maybe. And suddenly, you feel it. That sense that winter isn't just around you. It's watching you, waiting, measuring your strength. And just before your eyes close, you whisper a small phrase you've picked up from the others, a mix of thanks and defiance. Not tonight, cold. Not tonight. The next morning is different. The longhouse is already buzzing when you wake, boots thudding on packed earth, voices murmuring with that clipped, focused edge. People are bundling up with intent. Someone's waxing the runners of a sled. A woman's strapping dried cod to a pack like she's expecting a week-long trip. A man squints at a tangle of rope and swears softly in a dialect so old it probably predates grammar. Today is a travel day, which, in the depths of winter, means danger wrapped in fur and determination. You're invited, well, more like expected, to join. Someone hands you a thick cloak, sealskin over thick wool, and a pair of bone-tipped walking poles. You ask where you're going. The answer is wonderfully vague. East. Travel didn't stop in Viking winter. It just got inventive and significantly colder. You step outside, and the air is so dry it hurts. The snow underfoot is crisp, frozen into a hard crust that shatters under each step. A low mist hangs over the valley, curling around tree trunks and making every shadow look slightly haunted. It's beautiful in the way a well-forged axe is, elegant, dangerous, and absolutely not to be underestimated. Today's mode of transport, sleds, not the cheery gift-hauling kind. These are narrow wooden platforms lashed with raw hide, pulled by humans, sometimes dogs, occasionally livestock. They're efficient. They float over snow and ice, carrying everything from supplies to sick relatives. If you're coastal, there's another trick: sea travel. That's right, frozen sea travel. Parts of the fjords and coastal waters, especially further north, would freeze solid in winter. Not always completely, and not always safely, but enough for the truly determined. Some Viking paths turned into ice highways, with sleds and skates making better time than boats ever could. One man in your group straps what look like bones to his feet. They're skates, carved from horse or deer shin bones, tied to leather boots. He glides forward awkwardly at first, then smoothly, the way a fish darts through still water. Vikings didn't invent ice skating, but they certainly embraced it. Skating wasn't a novelty, it was transport, and sometimes sport, and occasionally battlefield strategy. A fringe tale exists of a Viking duel that began with insults and ended in a mid-lake skate fight. Neither side won. The ice did. You begin walking, sled ropes in hand, alongside the group. The silence out here is different from the forest, less oppressive, more vast, like walking across the surface of a paused world. The only sounds are the crunch of snow, the rhythmic shove of sled runners, and the occasional crack of distant ice adjusting to the sun's weight. Even conversation is quiet. Words are saved. Breath is precious. You learn to read gestures, shoulders tilting, chins nodding, eyebrows doing more work than a bard's tongue. Travel in winter was strategic. Villages didn't often sit right next to each other. You had to cross valleys, frozen rivers, and sometimes mountain passes. Routes were memorized, landmarks counted, 3 bent birches, then a boulder shaped like a seal, then the cave with icicles like teeth. Miss a turn, and you could vanish into white silence, never to be found. You stop midday for food, a strip of dried meat, a hunk of bread frozen solid, and a flask of something that tastes like someone distilled firewood. It burns going down but warms your core like a hug from an angry god. The break is short. You move again, this time following a narrow path along a frozen river. The sleds bump and slide. One tips slightly, spilling a bundle of fur-wrapped goods. No panic, just calm hands, methodical reloading, a silent nod, and on you go. Eventually, you come to a cluster of huts half buried in snow, another settlement. Smoke curling from holes in the roofs. Children watching you from behind hides. A dog barking, then giving up halfway through. The greeting is simple. A nod, a hand grasp, an offer of hot broth. You're strangers but not enemies. You're travelers, and in Viking winter, that's kin enough. You deliver goods, salt, dried berries, a few small tools. In return, a carved comb, some cured meat, a story. You rest inside their longhouse, nearly identical to your own. The same smoky warmth, the same protective runes, the same polite indifference to personal space. One elder tells a tale of the windwife, a spirit who rides blizzards and turns travelers backward. He claims he once lost a full day walking in circles because of her. His wife rolls her eyes, but no one laughs. Just in case. Historians still argue whether these travel spirits were widely believed or local inventions. But when you're 5 miles into white oblivion and the wind starts whispering your name, belief gets flexible. As the sun, what little there is, begins to sink, you prepare for the journey back. The return feels faster. Maybe the sleds glide easier. Maybe your muscles have adjusted. Or maybe the thought of the longhouse hearth waiting for you is enough to push you through. One sled hits a patch of glare ice and skids sideways. A rope snaps. No panic. The group swarms to help. In minutes, it's lashed back together with sinew and prayer. Because that's the thing out here. You don't survive by strength alone. You survive by cooperation, by ritual, by watching the ice, by listening when someone says, "That ridge isn't safe." Even if they don't know why, by nightfall you see it, the curl of smoke from home, the longhouse lights flickering behind thick hide-covered windows, a welcome back with no fanfare, just warmth, stew, and someone handing you a dry pair of socks like it's the most sacred thing in the world. You sit by the fire, limbs aching, heart full. You traveled through winter and came back whole. Not everyone does, but tonight you did. The longhouse is quieter tonight. Not silent, never that, but hushed in a different way. The kind of quiet that follows exertion. Travel. Work. Maybe a little weariness of the soul. People speak softer, move slower. The children don't shriek. Even the goats seem unusually respectful, lying curled like furry loaves near the hearth. You notice something new, a different kind of firelight. Not from the hearth, but from a small corner lamp, its flame low, colored with something aromatic. A woman is stirring a pot with no food in it. Just herbs, something sweet, something sharp. The steam smells like crushed apples and bitter bark. Someone nearby hums, not a tune you recognize. More of a note, held and swayed, like a thread trying to find its needle. It's not illness. It's not mourning. It's mood. Because this is the time of year when things get heavy. Viking winter wasn't just physically brutal. It was mentally brutal. Long nights, cold days, a world reduced to shades of gray and white. Weeks could pass without sun. It messes with you. It saps your strength in ways no storm ever could. They didn't have a word for seasonal depression, but they felt it. Everyone did. How could they not? Even the gods felt it. Take Odin, all-knowing, all-seeing, but also deeply broody. The All-Father spent a good chunk of mythology wandering, sacrificing, hanging from trees in search of knowledge, often alone, often grim. There's a theory among scholars and amateur therapists that Odin is the most melancholic of deities. And winter, that's his season. You sit with the others and sip something warm and mildly alcoholic, probably fermented honey, or turnip wine, or something no one has a name for, but everyone agrees helps. It doesn't taste great, but it makes your limbs feel looser, your thoughts slower. Music helps too. Not in the modern upbeat and peppy sense, but in that slow, droning, rhythmic style that gets into your ribs. The kind of music you can hum for hours without realizing. A bowed lyre plucks a few somber notes. A man taps a hand drum with the patience of a snowflake landing on moss. You start to understand how Vikings dealt with the dark, not by fighting it, but by sinking into it. Not resisting the melancholy, but embracing it like an old friend. They leaned into sadness the way they leaned into the cold, with preparation, with ritual, with shared understanding. You weren't broken for feeling heavy in winter. You were just paying your seasonal dues. One fringe belief held that sadness was the soul's way of communing with ancestors. That during the dark months, the distance between living and dead thinned, not just in ghost stories, but in emotion. If you felt sorrow for no reason, it was maybe because a long-dead great-grandmother was whispering across time. Some people would carve runes during these low periods. Not magical ones, just thoughts. Scratched into bone, stone, wood. Notebooks made of bark. A Norse version of journaling, perhaps. A coping mechanism. Something to do with your hands when your heart didn't want to be in your chest anymore. You watch as a young man presses a knife to a block of driftwood and begins etching. You don't ask what it means. You don't need to. A toddler crawls into her mother's lap. She's not crying, just restless, wide-eyed. You've been there, that feeling that something is off, even though no one said it aloud. The mother pulls her close and begins a lullaby, not a happy one, not a scary one. Just soft, gentle. It tells of a boat that sails under a frozen sky, guided by a whale with stars in its eyes. No clear ending, just drifting, but comforting. You close your eyes and listen. The music, the drum, the crackling of the lamp, someone pouring another cup, a few quiet coughs, the old rhythms of surviving the slow bleed of winter. There were also jokes, of course. Humor didn't disappear, it just turned dry, bleak, deliciously grim. Why don't frost giants have lovers? Someone mutters near you. Because they're too cold to commit, another replies. Groans and laughter follow. A few head shakes. Someone throws a crust of bread. It's all part of it. The sorrow, the silliness, the stew of feelings that winter stirs. No one tries to fix it. They just share it. Like everything else. And then comes the music again. Not from the lyre or drum this time, but from the group. A slow song, sung in low voices, like waves on a frozen shore. You don't know the words, but the melody makes your ribs ache in the nicest way. It's about a ship lost at sea, or maybe a woman waiting on a cliff, or maybe both. The song ends, and no one speaks. They don't need to. Outside, the night thickens. You can feel it pressing at the edges of the longhouse, waiting to come in. But inside, there's a kind of light that fire alone can't make. One that flickers quietly between people, and keeps going. Even in the dark, morning comes slow. It always does in this kind of winter. The fire never fully died, but it shrank to an exhausted glow, like it too had dreams of warmer seasons. You stretch beneath your furs, muscles sore, lips cracked, the familiar weight of cold pressing against your nose like a warning finger. The longhouse is still, but not in a peaceful way. Something's off. You sit up. Someone coughs. Deep, wet. Then again, not from smoke, something heavier. A child sleeps too still in the corner. You don't need to be told. You can feel it, because not every Viking made it through the winter. Sometimes the cold won. Even with all the rituals, the stories, the steaming stews and protective runes, sometimes a fever came in the night, or an elder's heart simply stopped beneath layers of fur, or a child wandered out while sleepwalking and vanished into white silence. It happened, and when it did, it was met with stillness, not panic, not sobbing, just a heavy, practiced quiet. Grief was not loud in the north. It was a shared cloak everyone wore for a while. The family gathers. No shouting, no ceremony yet, just the movements of people who have done this before. A woman brings a fresh tunic, carefully laying it across a small bundle in the corner. A man steps out with a shovel. Outside, the ground is frozen solid, too hard for quick burial. So they'll wait. Instead, they prepare. You help where you can, though what does helping even look like in this moment? Someone hands you a brush, and you start cleaning the floor. Not because it's dirty, but because movement matters. Because winter doesn't pause, even for sorrow. In Viking culture, death in winter was a kind of negotiation. You couldn't bury someone right away, not always. So sometimes, the body was wrapped, blessed, and placed in a temporary shelter, often above ground, near the longhouse, guarded by charms to keep animals and spirits away. There was no morgue, no embalming, just tradition, belief, and fur-lined patience. Historians still argue how consistent these death rites were. Burial mounds, boat burials, pyres, it varied. Some were burned, some entombed, others buried with tools, jewelry, and food for the afterlife. But in the harshest parts of the north, sometimes it was enough to simply wait for the ground to thaw, and even then there were risks. The Draugr, undead spirits, were said to rise if someone was buried improperly, if they died angry, if their possessions were stolen, or if no song was sung. You didn't mess with the dead, not in the winter, not when the walls between worlds were so thin. The skald recites a verse, simple, low. A few lines about the wind carrying names, the snow covering footprints, the sun returning. Everyone stands. No sobbing, no eulogies, just presence, just warmth for the living and the dead. Later, they'll hold a feast, not to celebrate, but to honor. Food will be shared, mead poured into the fire. A small wooden figure might be carved, added to the others on the household shrine. Death in Viking winter was a continuation, not a stop. A passage from this frozen world to the next. You step outside, the cold biting harder today. The sky is clear, too clear. A sign, a warning, a tribute. Someone walks past carrying firewood. Another is feeding the goats. The longhouse breathes, moves, lives on. But the absence is still there. In the silence between conversations, in the way the older child ties her shoes slower than usual, in the untouched bowl by the hearth. This is part of winter too. The part people don't tell stories about because it hurts too much, but it shapes you. Loss, sharpened by frost, leaves its mark. And yet, the strength of this place is not in its avoidance of pain, but in its ability to hold it. to make space for it without breaking, to allow grief to sit beside you at the fire and still pass the bread. Later, you help prepare the grave goods, a small doll carved from antler, a pouch of dried berries, a piece of cloth with runes stitched in blue thread. No one says what they mean. You can guess. The snow crunches outside as others walk the ridge, scouting for a place where the earth might be soft enough to dig. It's not likely, but it's something to do. Inside, the longhouse glows warm again, not because anyone feels better, but because they must. Because to stop is to freeze. You sip a bowl of broth. You sit a little closer to the others. Someone picks up a lyre. No song yet, just tuning. But music will come. It always does. In the sagas, even heroes die in winter. Warriors fall. Kings freeze. Children vanish. And the world turns quietly on. But it remembers, and so do you. A week passes, maybe more. Time slips strange in winter. Days stretch long and quiet. Nights come too early and leave too late. The grief softens but doesn't vanish. It never really does. It just becomes part of the rhythm. One more thread woven into the wool of survival. But today is different. It begins with light. Real light. You blink awake and catch it. Not the usual blue-gray haze. Not the dim flicker of firelight or oil lamps. But sunlight. Actual, golden, squint-inducing sunlight slipping through the smoke vent above, pouring onto the rafters like someone tipped over a pot of melted gold. Someone gasps. Someone else laughs. A child points upward, as if the ceiling itself has come alive. The sun has returned. Not fully. Not for long. But it's the first true bright light in weeks, and it changes everything. You rush outside with the others, boots thudding through old snow, now crusted with ice. You shade your eyes, unused to this brightness, and for a moment it feels like you're seeing the world in color again. The sky is impossibly blue. The trees sparkle with frost. Even the snow seems to glow. A dog howls, happy, or confused. You're not sure. This moment is sacred. The return of the sun marked a powerful transition for the Vikings. It meant the turning of the wheel, the deep midpoint of winter past, and spring, though distant, now approached. Days would begin to grow again, imperceptibly at first, like a whisper getting louder. But it would come, and with this celestial shift came celebration. Today, you prepare for the Solbjata Dagur, sun-bright day. Not every region called it that. Not every village celebrated on the same exact date. Historians still argue whether it was a formal festival or just a local observance layered over with later Christian feast days. But among the old families, it was a thing. Inside the longhouse, energy buzzes. People tidy, sweep, scrub furs. Someone digs through a chest and pulls out old finery. Tunics stitched with dyed thread, jewelry that hasn't seen daylight in months. One woman even braids her hair with dried flowers, preserved since last summer. They crumble a bit. No one minds. And the food. Oh, the food. The meager rations of winter are stretched for one day of excess. The best dried meats. The last of the smoked fish. Flatbread toasted over open flame. Butter scraped from the bottom of barrels. Someone uncorks the final jug of sweet mead, and everyone cheers like it's been aged in Valhalla itself. You help string pine branches over the door, green against the white landscape. A reminder that not everything dies in the cold, that some things sleep, some things endure. Children make little suns from straw and hang them on the walls, not because they have to. Because they want to. Because they remember. One boy stands on a bench and shouts, "The sun has returned." Everyone claps. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, An elder recites a verse. The dark has teeth, but the sun has memory. Light forgets nothing, and always comes home. No one speaks for a moment. Not because it's sad, but because it's true. Outside, you climb a small ridge with the others to watch the full rise. The sun hovers just above the horizon, still low, still tentative, like a guest not sure if they're welcome. But it's here, and that's enough. Some in the group kneel. Others raise their arms. A child begins to sing. A tune without words, passed down in the back of throats and the soft rhythm of winter mornings. You hum along. It's impossible not to. And then there's fire. A bonfire, built not for heat, but for celebration. Flames licking skyward, casting dancing shadows on snowbanks. People throw in small offerings, scraps of cloth, dried herbs, tiny carved figures. Someone tosses in the straw sun they made earlier. It blazes instantly. Smoke rises, carrying gratitude. You learn there's a tradition. Once the fire dies, you gather a piece of its charred wood and save it, tucked into a pouch, hung above a door, not for magic, not exactly, just for memory, for proof that warmth returned. You pocket your coal fragment and feel it still warm against your hand. Later, back in the longhouse, the mood is different. Lighter, not joyful, not yet, but ready. There's talk of plans. Repairs to the boats once the ice melts. Seeds to be gathered. Tools to be sharpened. A return to the world. The children build snowmen outside, not trolls, this time, but tall, lumpy shapes with sunburst halos made from reeds. One declares his snow figure, the Sun King, protector of goats and breakfast. Someone adds a crown made of bones. Why not? Inside, someone plays a lyre with actual pep. You're not used to hearing it in anything other than mournful tones. It feels odd, but good. Like laughter after a long silence. And just before sleep, someone mutters, "Did you see how long the sun stayed today? Twice as long as last week." It's true. The light is stretching. The shadows are shifting. You curl under your furs, holding the coal piece, your fingers still faintly smudged. The fire flickers. The longhouse breathes. And somewhere, beyond the ridge, the sun slips down with promise on its back. Tomorrow will be brighter, and the next day brighter still. The days continue to stretch, like sleepy limbs easing out of a long-held shiver. What was once a fleeting gleam of light becomes minutes, then hours of amber warmth, pouring through smoke holes and settling gently on the shoulders of those who survived. And you did survive, not alone, not unscarred, but upright, alert, and still breathing in the bitter air with a touch less dread. The longhouse feels different now, though nothing physical has changed. The fire still burns. The goats still make exactly the wrong kind of noises at the wrong times. But the mood, the pulse, has shifted. It hums with forward motion. Outside, the snow begins to shift from hard crust to slushy softness. Icicles drip like ticking clocks, counting down to spring. The path between longhouses, once treacherous with ice, becomes muddy, almost playful. Children stop sliding and start splashing. And the adults? They begin preparing for the thaw. Thawing isn't simple. It's not a sudden burst of sunshine and flower crowns. It's messy. It's a logistical nightmare. And it's absolutely vital. You help scrape old ice from the longhouse roof, dangerous if it falls, wasteful if left. Beneath it, turf and wood begin to breathe again. You can almost hear the building sigh. Inside, winter bedding is unrolled and aired out, furs brushed, clothing repatched for the coming mud and movement. Someone even opens a long sealed chest in the corner. Tools, ropes, small wooden carvings of boats, fingers already twitching with anticipation of rivers unfreezing. There's a moment, quiet but profound, when someone speaks the first word no one dared say in months: planting. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. And that word carries a kind of magic. Because surviving the coldest nights wasn't just about staying warm, it was about believing the thaw would come, that the world, so locked and lifeless, would one day again be green and noisy and alive. You see it in the way people walk now, more upright, less guarded. Jokes return, sharper and sillier. There's a game involving hitting each other with pieces of leftover dried fish. You ask if it has rules. No one knows. It's glorious. Someone starts cleaning out a corner near the hearth. You ask why. For the seeds, they say, as if it's obvious. The seeds that have been hidden, protected, sometimes prayed over. Seeds from last year's harvest, dried, stored, wrapped in stories and patience. Each one a small, wrinkled act of faith. And now they're being prepared for the return. The children are taught how to sort them. What color means rot, what size means strength. You watch a 5-year-old make judgment calls like a seasoned farmer. You don't question it. Even the animals seem to know. The goats bleat louder. The chickens scratch harder. A sheep gives birth to a shivering, stubborn-limbed lamb, and everyone gathers to watch, eyes wide, shoulders soft. It's a moment. No one says it, but everyone knows. Spring is coming. One of the elders calls the children to the center of the longhouse and tells a story, not of frost giants or angry gods, but of the first spring. Of how the world thawed for the first time, not because the cold gave up, but because the earth itself grew tired of silence. The ground split. The trees groaned. The rivers rolled over themselves, desperate to move again. And from that noise, that chaos, came life. It's a strange story. Messy. A little violent. A little hopeful. Like thaw itself. Historians still debate whether these kinds of spring tales were myth or metaphor, or just hopeful lies told to children to make the last weeks of ice easier. But the feeling behind them, that's real, that's human. And now the longhouse opens its doors a little longer each day. The fire still burns, but it isn't needed in quite the same way. People sit closer to the walls now, where the sun creeps in. They stretch their legs. They smile more. One woman begins sketching something in charcoal on the longhouse wall. Spirals, leaves, rivers. It's not decoration. It's reminder. Another takes down the rune stave above the door, the same one carved back in the worst of the wind. She doesn't burn it. She doesn't discard it. She buries it with a whisper of thanks. You understand. It did its job. And now it rests. You step outside one morning and see it. The first patch of brown, living earth peeking through the snow. It's ugly, wet, muddy, glorious. You crouch, touch it. It's warm, not hot, not soft, but warm. And in that moment, with the longhouse behind you and the entire thaw ahead, you realize something. The cold doesn't make the Vikings strong. The return from the cold does. And now, as the fire burns low and the longhouse settles for the night, your eyes grow heavy. The firs are warm, the air is still, and the winter wind, once so fierce, now only sighs gently against the walls. Outside, the snow no longer threatens. It melts quietly in the shadows, feeding the earth, whispering its long farewell. You hear a faint dripping, the slow thawing of the eaves, like the world waking from sleep. You've made it through the longest night. Through the weight of dark, the quiet ache of cold, and the creak of ancient wood holding firm against the storm. You've shared warmth, stories, fear, laughter, and stillness. Now, all of it softens. Even the memories blur at the edges. You picture the fire one last time, the low flicker of amber, the hiss of pine sap, the glow of faces lit by something more than flame. You picture the children curled like foxes, the scent of smoked meat and wool still in the air, and a carved figure tucked into the corner, watching over it all. Let your breath slow, let your muscles loosen. There's no rush now, no wolves at the door, just rest. You are safe, you are warm, and somewhere, beneath the frost, spring is already beginning. Sleep well, traveler, sleep deep.